The earth of the open field is still wet with the first human blood ever spilled. Cain stands over the quiet body of his brother, Abel, listening to a voice from heaven. Tell him that the ground itself has opened its mouth to curse him. But the first murderer does not ask for forgiveness. He asks for protection. He tells God that his punishment is greater than he can bear. He knows that he is about to be driven out from the arable land, exiled from the immediate presence of the Lord. And he knows something else. He knows that whoever finds him wandering the wild earth will kill him. And the paradox is this: God agrees. Read that again. Instead of striking Cain down, the Creator places something on him to keep him alive. The mystery is not simply why God spared a killer, but what physical, visible reality was actually fastened to Cain's flesh to terrify a pre-flood world into leaving him alone. Listen to the exact decree in Genesis 4:14 and 15. Cain speaks first. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord responds, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Stop right there. Picture it. A man exiled from the presence of God, yet wearing a divine insignia of total immunity. For centuries, Western readings have painted this as a simple scar, a dark blemish, or a crude tattoo cut into his forehead. We have reduced the Mark of Cain to a metaphor for guilt. But when you look at the ancient Jewish writings, like the Aramaic Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, a text capturing the oldest rabbinic understandings of the Torah, the mark is not described as a mere physical defect. It is something far more imposing. I hold this Aramaic tradition not as equal to the biblical canon, but as a window into how the ancients understood the original language. To see what they saw, we have to strip away the English word mark. The text is hiding a massive clue in plain sight. In Hebrew, the word translated as mark is owth. Owth. It does not mean a blemish. It does not mean a scratch. It means a sign, a banner, a blazing standard of territory. It is the exact same word used in Genesis 1 for the stars in the sky marking the seasons, and in Exodus for the blood painted on the doorposts to stop the angel of death. See the scene. Cain is not walking away with a subtle birthmark on his cheek. He is walking away bearing an owth, a warning sign so undeniable, so violently divine, that no one in the harsh, expanding generations before the flood would dare lift a rock against him. God branded him with life. Cain becomes an untouchable exile. The ground will not yield its strength to his hands, but no human hand can take his breath. The owth ensures it. But this leaves us staring at an unsettling blank space in the English text. The English Bible tells us exactly what the mark did, but it refuses to tell us what it looked like. To see the physical reality of the owth, we have to step out of the English and look closely at how the ancient scribes recorded the strange weight of this word. What cosmic banner did God actually drape over the shoulders of the first murderer? He turns his back on the arable ground. He steps out into the unforgiving open, moving toward a territory the biblical text calls the land of Nod. Genesis 4:16 tells us exactly what this departure looks like. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. Stop right there. He is walking into exile, but he is not walking naked. He carries the owth. To understand the sheer visual shock of what the pre-flood world saw when they looked at him, We must let the King James text define its own terms. Watch what the Bible does with this exact Hebrew word in other places. In Genesis 1:14, God commands the sun and moon into the sky, and let them be for signs and for seasons. The word for signs is owth. In Exodus 12:13, the Lord commands Israel to paint the blood of the lamb on their doorposts to stop the angel of death, and the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. The word for token is owth. In Numbers 2:2, the tribes of Israel are ordered to arrange their massive encampments in the wilderness. Every man of the children of Israel shall pitch by his own standard with the ensign of their father's house. The word for standard is owth. 3 verses, 3 massive, unmistakable visual broadcasts. A celestial beacon, a blood-soaked doorpost, a towering military flag. Same word, same weight. Read that again. God did not give Cain a quiet tattoo. He turned the first murderer into a walking, breathing standard of divine jurisdiction. We read the mark as a brand of shame, a permanent criminal record carved into his cheek. But the Hebrew reveals the exact opposite. The mark was an impenetrable, violent shield. Go back to the core verse, Genesis 4:15. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Look at the verb set. The English feels passive, like placing a stamp on paper. But the Hebrew root is summum. It means to impose, to ordain, to forcefully establish a fixed boundary. God imposed a barricade upon the flesh of a killer. Why? Because the world outside the immediate borders of Eden was not an empty wasteland. We often read early Genesis as if Adam, Eve, and Cain are the only humans on the map. But Cain's own terror, "Every one that findeth me shall slay me," betrays the reality of an expanding human family. A sprawling, ruthless, long-living population that knows exactly what Cain did in that field, and they want his blood. Picture it. A hunting party of early humanity, strong and furious, closing in on the outcast in the dirt of Nod. But suddenly, they stop. They drop their weapons. They step back in absolute dread. They see the owth. It had to be undeniable. It had to communicate instantly, without a single word spoken, that striking this vagabond meant declaring war on the creator of the universe. A military banner is made of woven cloth. A celestial sign is made of burning gas. What was this banner made of when it was imposed upon human skin? We know it was terrifying, and we know it commanded the awe of a violent world. But to see the actual shape of the mark, we must open a text from the ancient synagogues that refuse to let the description remain blank. Look closely at the skin of the vagabond. Genesis 4:15 tells us, "And the Lord set a mark upon Cain." The English text is utterly silent on where this mark was placed, how large it was, or what color it bled into the dirt of the land of Nod. But the ancient synagogues did not leave the canvas blank. To see the first physical description of the owth, the cosmic banner placed on Cain, we must unroll an Aramaic text called Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. This was an ancient translation of the Torah, read aloud to Jewish congregations who no longer spoke fluent Hebrew. But a Targum did not just translate word for word. It expanded the text. It captured the deep, ancient oral traditions of the rabbis, writing them directly into the biblical narrative, so the congregation would understand the history behind the verses. When the scribes of this Targum reached Genesis 4:15, they refused to translate the mark as a simple blemish. Watch what the Aramaic text actually says. The Targum reads, "And the Lord traced upon Cain's face a letter of his great and holy name." Read that again. God did not carve a scar into the killer. He engraved a piece of himself. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But sit with the sheer visual terror of what this implies. In ancient Jewish theology, the divine name, the tetragrammaton, YHWH is not merely a title. It is the unpronounceable, blazing architecture of reality. It is the name the High Priest of Israel would only dare to whisper once a year in the suffocating darkness of the Holy of Holies. And according to the Targum, God took one of those blazing consonants and stamped it directly onto the forehead of a murderer. Picture it. Cain wanders into a pre-flood settlement. The expanding generations of humanity recognize him. They know what he did to Abel. Men reach for heavy stones. They form a circle, intending to crush his skull and wipe the first killer off the map. But as they step close, the shadow on Cain's face shifts. A luminous, terrifying geometry flares on his skin. A glowing, radiating letter of the living God. They drop the stones. They back away in absolute dread. The mark terrifies the world, not because it says guilty, but because it says mine. It is the ultimate no trespassing sign. By branding Cain with a letter of the divine name, God was declaring absolute, exclusive jurisdiction over his life. You do not touch the property of the sovereign. If you strike the man wearing the king's seal, you are not avenging a murder. You are declaring war on the king. This is the agonizing paradox of the luminous letter. Cain is exiled from the presence of God, yet he is forced to wear the presence of God on his face every single day. The mark is a shield of grace, but it is also a crushing weight. He cannot hide. He cannot blend in. He is a walking, breathing monument to divine sovereignty. The glowing letter fits perfectly with the Hebrew word owth, a standard, a visible beacon. But it is not the only record preserved in the ancient scrolls. As we look deeper into the rabbinic commentaries of the Midrash Rabbah, the physical nature of the mark violently shifts. The scribes step away from the luminous geometry of the name, and they suggest something entirely different. Something that doesn't glow on the skin, but walks in the dirt. We have seen the blazing letter, a glowing brand of divine immunity. But another rabbinic scroll removes the letter entirely, replacing it with something that breathes, pants, and bares its teeth. What if the mark of Cain was not something he wore on his flesh, but something assigned to follow him in the dark? The dust of Nod shifts under heavy footsteps. Two sets of prints in the dirt, one human, one something else. We assume the mark of Genesis 4 was fastened to Cain's skin. But the ancient sages of Israel kept another record, pulling the translation in a completely different direction. To see it, we have to open the Midrash Genesis Rabbah. This is a vast collection of rabbinic commentaries from late antiquity, gathering the oldest oral debates over the exact wording of the Torah. When the rabbis looked at Genesis 4:15, some of them argued the Western reading of the text was fundamentally flawed. The King James reads, "And the Lord set a mark upon Cain." But look at the Hebrew. The preposition translated as upon is the letter lamed, forming the prefix le. It can mean upon, but it is far more commonly translated as to or for. God gave a sign to Cain. Stop right there. If the owth, the visible standard, the divine warning was given to him, it did not have to be carved into his flesh. It could be something he held, or something that followed him. Midrash Genesis Rabbah records this staggering tradition. A dog was given to him. Read that again. Not a blazing letter of fire, not a brand on the cheek, a living, breathing beast. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But sit with the sheer unsettling reality of this image. In the ancient Near East, dogs were not domesticated pets sleeping by the hearth. They were scavengers. They were fierce, half-wild predators that guarded the perimeters of encampments. Watch what the Bible does with this animal. In Exodus 11:7, When God is describing the absolute supernatural protection he will place around his people before the final plague, he says, "But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue, against man or beast, that ye may know how that the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel." The dog is the boundary line. Now bring that back to the primeval wilderness. The pre-flood earth was harsh, filling rapidly with an expanding human family that wanted blood vengeance for Abel. Cain is exiled, cursed from the arable ground. He has no walls, no city yet. How does God protect a man sleeping in the open dirt? He assigns a primeval guardian. Picture it. The hunting parties track the first murderer into the deep wilderness. They find him by a fire. They draw their heavy stones and bronze blades. But stepping out of the shadows, teeth bared, is a terrifying canine. It does not look like a wild wolf. It carries the unmistakable, heavy aura of divine assignment. The beast is the owth. The animal itself is the visible warning banner. You do not touch the man guarded by the hound of heaven. This shifts the entire emotional weight of Cain's exile. He is utterly cut off from humanity, but he is not physically alone. He walks the cursed earth accompanied by a violent, unyielding protector that answers only to God. The beast keeps the killers at bay, but it is also a constant, panting reminder of his crime. Everywhere he goes, the shadow of the dog goes. The protection is the punishment. A luminous letter forces Cain to wear the presence of God. A guardian beast forces him to walk beside it. But there is a third scroll in the ancient rabbinic debates, and it carries a physical description far more grotesque than the first two combined. The mark was not a letter. It was not an animal. What if the standard of God was a biological mutation forced out of his own bones? The skin on the forehead of the vagabond pulls tight, then breaks. Bone pushes through flesh. If the ancient rabbis were correct, God did not just hand Cain a guardian beast, nor did he simply brand him with fire. According to a darker, more visceral tradition preserved in the Midrash Genesis Rabbah, the owth, the divine warning sign, was a sudden, violent biological mutation. Rabbi Judah, one of the ancient sages debating the exact nature of Genesis 4:15, went on record with a terrifying assertion: a horn grew out of him. Read that again. Not a subtle scar, not a tattoo. A protrusion of bone extending directly from his skull. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But sit with the sheer horror of this image. The pre-flood world was vast, and the expanding generations of Adam's line were hunting the man who brought death into the human family. Cain needed a shield that could be seen from a distance. He needed an insignia of immunity that no human being could ever forge, fake, or replicate. A glowing letter can be hidden under a hood. A dog can be outrun or killed. But a horn growing from the skull? That is permanent. That is monstrous. Picture it. Cain walks into a settlement on the edge of the wilderness. The people there have heard the stories of the first murder. They have been waiting for him. But when the outcast steps into the light of their fire, they do not see a normal man. They see a human being physically warped by the judgment of heaven. They see a biological nightmare. They drop their weapons. They step back. The mutation itself is the barricade. To understand why a horn would stop an ancient hunting party in its tracks, we have to look at what that specific object means in the biblical text. The Hebrew word for horn is keren. Throughout the Old Testament, a horn is never just a piece of bone. It is the absolute symbol of sovereign power. Watch what the text does. In 1 Samuel 16:13, David is anointed king with oil poured from a keren, a horn. In 1 Kings 1:50, a man running for his life flees into the tabernacle and grabs hold of the horns of the altar to receive divine asylum. Power, immunity, asylum, same symbol, same weight. If God forced a keren to grow from Cain's head, He was giving him a dark, twisted crown. It was the physical manifestation of the promise in Genesis 4:15. Whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. The horn was the altar of asylum built directly into his anatomy. He could never be touched, but he could never be normal again. He becomes a creature of the wild, a beast wearing the face of a man, carrying the untouchable authority of God. We have looked at the mark as a glowing letter, a companion hound, and a protruding horn. All three ancient Jewish traditions answer the same mystery: how God kept the first murderer alive in a world that wanted him dead. The mark, whatever its exact physical form, protected Cain from the wrath of men, but it did not protect him from the earth. Men would not touch him. But the ground he walked on had its own violent reaction to the blood of Abel. To understand the true agony of Cain's exile, we have to look closely at the place the Bible says he fled to, a place called Nod. He takes a step. The dust shudders and turns to ash. He is wearing the owth, the divine standard of immunity. Whether it is a blazing letter, a companion beast, or a mutation of bone, human hands are entirely bound by the decree. No man can strike him, but the dirt is not bound by the decree. Look at the geography of his exile in Genesis 4:16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Stop right there. For centuries, Western readers have treated Nod as a province, a physical kingdom on a map, a designated sanctuary city for the first murderer. But drop the King James English and look at the Hebrew root underneath the location. The word is nude. It does not mean a quiet valley. It is a verb. It means to wander aimlessly, to flee, to tremble violently. Read that again. Cain did not walk into a place called Nod. He walked into a perpetual state of trembling. Go back to the exact wording of the curse in Genesis 4:11 and 12. God speaks directly to the killer. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. The Hebrew word translated as vagabond is that exact same root, nude. He is cursed from the earth. Picture it. The mark on his flesh commands the absolute terror of the human race. It forces the expanding hunting parties to lower their weapons and let him pass. But the ground beneath him remembers the taste of Abel's blood. The arable soil violently rejects his footprints. To understand the sheer physical agony of this exile, we must open an ancient text called the Book of Jubilees. Called by the early church the Little Genesis, it was preserved whole for millennia inside the Ethiopian Bible. Jubilees expands the timeline and the mechanics of the pre-flood world, recording how the earth itself was fundamentally defiled by the first murder. The soil did not just become barren, it became hostile. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But sit with the cosmic physics of what this implies. God did not just make farming difficult for Cain. He weaponized the crust of the earth against him. This is the violent, agonizing paradox of the owth. The mark guarantees his survival, but it forces him to survive in a world that is actively trying to shake him off its back. He cannot sleep deeply because the ground quakes beneath him. He cannot settle because the soil turns to dust under his feet. He is trapped in a biological cage of divine protection, forced to wander a planet that hates him. He is untouchable, but he is completely untethered. God branded him with life, then placed him on an earth that wanted him dead. The mark is not just a shield against human weapons. It is the heavy, suffocating weight of God's sovereignty keeping him breathing when everything in the natural order is screaming for his blood. But this raises a staggering legal question embedded in the decree itself. God told the earth not to yield to him, and he told humanity not to touch him. But he attached a very specific mathematical warning to the human side of that command. The mark guarantees he cannot be killed, while the earth guarantees he cannot find rest. But the decree of God in Genesis 4 contains a mathematical warning that echoes deep into the long-living generations before the flood. How exactly does a sevenfold vengeance operate against a violent world where men live for 900 years? A hand reaches into the loose earth. Fingers wrap around a heavy, jagged stone. The hunter has the vagabond in his sights. The target is Cain. The crime is the blood of Abel. Blood demands blood. It is the oldest, most visceral law of human nature. But the stone drops. The hunter turns and walks away. It is not just the visual shock of the owth, the glowing letter, the companion beast, or the protruding horn that paralyzes the pre-flood world. The mark is backed by a terrifying legal mathematics. Listen to the exact decree anchored in Genesis 4:15. Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. Stop right there. We read that as a simple, poetic threat, a generic promise of severe punishment. But look at the Hebrew. The word for sevenfold is shibbathaim. It is inextricably linked to the root word shaba, which means to swear an oath. God is not just issuing a warning. He is binding himself to a cosmic, unbreakable treaty of disproportionate violence. Watch what the text does. Later in the biblical record, the Mosaic law will establish the famous rule of proportional justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. That is strict, legal balance. That is equity. But God does not offer equity to anyone who touches Cain. He promises exponential devastation. Picture it. In the expanding generations before the flood, the genealogies of Genesis record men living vast, sprawling lifespans. 800, 900 years. If a man standing in the land of Nod threw that heavy stone and crushed Cain's skull, he would not simply be struck down by a sudden illness. The ancient Jewish understanding of sevenfold vengeance was violently generational. 7 generations of the killer's bloodline would be systematically eradicated. And because of the pre-flood lifespans, the killer would live long enough to watch every single one of his descendants die. Sit with that. The mark is an impenetrable shield of terror. And we know it shaped the psychology of the ancient world, because the Bible gives us a dark, twisted echo of it just 8 verses later. Go to Genesis 4:23. Cain's great-great-great-grandson, Lamech, gathers his 2 wives. He holds a weapon. He has just murdered a young man for wounding him. And Lamech sings a violent poem known as the Song of the Sword. Listen to Genesis 4:24. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Read that again. Lamech takes the divine shield of his ancestor and twists it into human arrogance. He weaponizes the math. God used the sevenfold oath to stop the cycle of murder. Lamech uses a 77-fold threat to justify his own psychotic retribution. The Mark of Cain worked. No one touched the first murderer. But the mathematical oath attached to that mark bred a culture utterly obsessed with exponential violence. The vagabond is perfectly safe and perfectly damned. He cannot be touched by the blade of a man, but he cannot stop walking, because the ground beneath him violently rejects his weight. The sevenfold oath keeps his heart beating, while the curse of the earth tries to shake him loose. But a man can only tremble for so long. What happens when the exile cursed from the arable soil, decides he is utterly exhausted with wandering and forces the dirt that hates him into the shape of towering walls. Go back to the open field where this began. The dirt is still wet with the first human blood ever spilled. Cain is standing over the quiet body of his brother, listening to the voice of God decree his exile. He begs for his life, terrified of the expanding human family that will hunt him down. And God gives him what he asks for. You have read this scene 100 times. A murderer gets a mark and walks away. But you cannot see it that way anymore. Picture the vagabond stepping out into the land of Nod. The earth beneath him is violently shuddering, turning to ash under his feet. He is cursed from the arable soil. He cannot settle. He cannot build. He is forced into a perpetual state of trembling, but no one can touch him. The owth is there, the divine standard of immunity. We do not know exactly what the hunting parties of the pre-flood world saw when they tracked him into the dark. It may have been the blazing, luminous letter of the Tetragrammaton recorded in the Aramaic Targums, turning his skin into a terrifying beacon of divine property. It may have been the primeval, panting hound of heaven pacing at his side, as the Midrash recorded, or it may have been the sudden, violent mutation of bone, a horn growing from his skull, crowning him as an untouchable monster. Whatever the physical shape of the banner, it paralyzed a violent world. The mark is not a metaphor for a guilty conscience. It is an active, violently enforced shield. God did not mark Cain to excuse the murder. He marked Cain to stop the bleeding. By wrapping the first killer in an impenetrable sevenfold oath of vengeance, God was drawing a line in the primeval dirt. He was declaring that human life is not cheap, and that the right to take it back belongs exclusively to the sovereign. You do not touch the man wearing the king's seal. This is the agonizing, suffocating paradox of the sealed vagabond. God spared him, but wrapped his survival in absolute terror. He is locked in a cage of divine protection, forced to wander a planet that violently rejects his weight. We know the mathematics of his immunity. We know the trembling mechanics of his exile, but the precise visual shock of what the pre-flood killers saw when they dropped their stones? The desert is still holding the rest. I offer this as one reading, not the final word. Test the ancient scrolls against the canon, the way the Bereans tested everything. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word "watched" below. Subscribe to the channel as we continue to recover the lost context and forgotten texts of the ancient biblical world. And send this video to one person who loves the mysteries of Genesis, but has never heard of the blazing letter of the Targums or the primeval beast of Nod. The King James text tells us, "The Lord set a mark upon Cain." Look closely at the vagabond walking into the eastern wilderness. He is not just wearing his guilt. He is wearing the agonizing, terrifying weight of a God who refuses to let humanity tear itself apart.